we go. Good morning, listeners in the Superyacht radio world. This is Pippa, and it's Walking the Plank this week without our young Dave. And I've brought with me along to walk the plank two young gentlemen from Intellian Technologies. Intellian are an antenna manufacturer for VSAT in the maritime industry. One of the leaders, one of my preferred, but we're not selling that today. We're doing an educational discussion today. And I brought along, oh my goodness, I should have asked how we check these, how to spell, to pronounce the surname here. I'll let them introduce them. Blad is one young gentleman, and Paul Comyns, who I've known for a long time, is the other one. So Blad, perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely, Pippa. Good morning. My name is Bladimiros Stavropoulos. I've been in the maritime industry for about 18 years now. I've worked with satellite operators, cruise lines operators, and designing of satellites, and also did a little bit of a summer vacation in the Cisco world as the head of the wireless team. So more than happy to have the time to talk about educational points for VSAT and maritime.
And Paul?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Great to see you again, Pippa. So my name is Paul Comyns, and I'm on the sales and marketing side of Intellian. And actually, you can tell from my accent, I'm based up here in Seattle, Washington. And so it's great to be invited to be a part of the Super Yacht Radio again. It's been a while since I appeared on the radio, so it's great. And thank you for inviting us along.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. Vlad, so you've got more of a background in networking then as well.
Yes, I actually had the pleasure to work in networking on my previous days as an ethical hacker for a firm in Latin America. And that brings the cybersecurity portion of my knowledge to Intellian. And also now after that, I moved to the United States where I evolved in security and visa communications.
And you're both based in the US, yeah? I know you are, Paul, yes.
Correct, yes. I'm sitting in Miami and Pembroke Pines, and Paul sits in Seattle, like as he just said.
Yeah, okay. So where are we? Where do you think we're going in the next 6 years with the VSAT communications? I mean, I know, I know that you guys have been involved very heavily in the GX program as the sort of first extension out of away from the stock standard KU C-band type of stuff. Where do you see us in the next 6 years, 5 years?
So there is a continuous growth into the adoption of KA band because of the economical piece of the amount of megabits you can put per hertz into the structure. For those not aware, is the satellite world is measuring hertz, even though we send data in megabits. The amount of data you can put through that, it creates a more attractive market for that band. Now, from the previous days of KU, C-band, and also GX, the new adoptions of KA have brought broader and larger capacity to the structures. So LEOs are going to be in the market. MEOs are already there providing, and there's new companies providing newer constellations and new satellite families to deliver broader and larger bandwidth to all the ships, and also now bringing more coverage. On the new world of communications in 6 years, I see us all operating in something non-geostationary in the non-GSOs, because you will have to want a home-like experience or an office-like experience, doesn't matter where you sit. And unfortunately, even though geo continues to be very good and deliver capacity, it's limited by the amount of megabits you can get. On the non-geostationary, you can hit into the gigabytes of data rather than the megabits or the kilobits of data.
And Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, I see. From the customer's point of view, they're expecting and seeing broadband connectivity wherever they go, whether you're in an office, at home, working from your car, or out working in a maritime world. People are looking for greater throughput, greater levels of connectivity. And so we see the change in the satellite world as to increase the throughput, as Blad has described, increasing the speed, also reducing the size of the antenna. The antenna footprints are getting smaller, but yet still able to push the same amount of data or traffic. So it really is driven from the customer's point of view that everyone wants to use their own device. They're coming on board with iPads, phones, laptops. And so it's really driving this increase in demand. And there's new satellite providers coming online. And we see every day in the news these new constellations being launched. And so there will be a lot of diversity and a lot of options with, as Blad says, the geostationary satellites that we know and see today, and then the MEO, the mid-Earth orbit satellites. And these are the ones that are at a much lower orbit and are providing greater throughput. And then the LEO satellites are even lower still. And those are the sort of consumer type satellites that we see SpaceX and others launching. And those give a coverage with multiple satellites passing overhead, providing a sort of mesh of coverage. And those antennas are smaller, but again, have a certain amount of throughput. Some of that's a bit limited at the moment, but we will see increases in that as we move forward. I think also technology will change and we'll see a bit more adoption of flat panels and other clever ideas onto how to implement the user terminal, the terminal that goes on board the vessel or goes on board somebody's building. We'll start to see different shapes in those in 6 to 10 years' time.
So that's an interesting point. So I don't know, I was going to sort of follow up with a question there was, how does Intellian see itself fitting into that change that's coming up? But I will ask you that question later down the track. But coming from what you were saying there, when you think about, say, for instance, the new isotropics antenna, I know we're talking about competitors and things, but this is we're trying to be educational here too. If you look at that antenna, and I know it's not up there and working and running at the moment, but that's a sort of hybrid flat panel stroke, looks a little bit like a Certus type terminal. Do you think that the day of the stabilized antenna is done or will be done in the short person? Yeah, go ahead, Vlad. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so there is a two trends into this, and it's all basic into the amount of bandwidth that you're expecting to receive. The flat panels are rated, the current technology that is going to be used for the next 3 to 5 years are limited in the amount of bandwidth they can provide back to the satellite. The satellite to the vessel, it continues to be broad and open in a flat array as it is on a parabolic system, which is the system that Intellian mostly produce. And we are also in the flat panel services. We've been studying it for years, but it is the limitation of how much you can return. And yes, the internet is built to send small packages and receive larger information in return. But as the technology continues to evolve, piece of the integration to this is the fact that you are able to share your experience. And when you want to share your experience, your amount of data to the internet, it continues to grow. To give you an example of something that I did when I was with the cruise lines, when I joined the cruise lines in 2014, the bandwidth to the ships were aggregated across all the fleet of 100 vessels. There were 284 megabits. When I left the company in 2019, December 2019, the aggregated capacity of the entire fleet was 12.7 gigabytes. And it was a split 50-50 between downstream and upstream. So that gives you a trend of how much you want to share. And so to not lose the trend, on the flat array, you're limited in what you can return. The parabolics will continue to be upfront in the run, because as the terminals get smaller, because the satellites are closer, the wear and tear into the components that move in a balanced system is not as exponential as it is for larger systems. To give you an example, on a LEO terminal in any given point of the world, you will have an average of 500 handovers to a single 24-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
So every 3 to 4 minutes, you will have to switch satellites, either in the polar orbiter or in the equatorial orbitals. You're going to continue to have that. We continue to work with modem manufacturers and also motors and belts and all of that to keep the parabolic as a front runner. But we know, as Paul said, we're going to continue to see, and it's isotropic is breaking the barrier with their terminal right now. It's creating that closer path to compare two systems from a flat array to a parabolic, where they both are able to deliver the same amount of service. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you're talking about the times, you're talking about like the 2016s or whatever it was you were talking about.
14s.
So, yeah, so we only need to go back 20 years when I was still working on board ships as the engineer. We used to think 64 kilobits was a high-speed connection. 32 bits was our standard connection, and we used to have a little floppy disk that we would have to put in to override it on fleet 33 or 55 or 77. We'd have to put it in to override it to get our 64 kilobits. Not so yeah, it's quite the change has been quite dramatic in 20 years. So I think,
Yes.
in the next 10, it's going to 6 to 10, it's definitely going to change a lot. And so do you think then that, I think Paul, for you, what do you think now when we're trying to, for instance, we're trying to put people into antennas at the moment, we're looking at, what 60 NXs or 1 meter NXs and things. How do you think we justify to those people the expenditure, the capital investment that they have at this point in time, if this whole system is going to be changing in 4 to 6 years, 6 to 10 years, however long?
It is a very good question, because people want to invest in something that's often the phrase coined is future-proof, and allowing something to be updated or adjusted or adapted to operate for longer than just the period that service is available. And so we're seeing more antennas and being built in such a way that they'll work with a geo provider today. And as a mid-Earth orbit, a MEO or LEO provider comes along, there's the option to switch to those providers. So I think it's always very important for a captain or a fleet manager to consider the future of the vessel, where it's going, what it's going to be doing, but also to ensure that whatever hardware or equipment is put on board, that it can be updated, it can be augmented to operate on these new networks as they come along. You don't want it to be stuck on an old service. I often think of it as like a cell phone, an unlocked cell phone. If you have a cell phone that's locked into a provider, when you don't like that provider anymore, you're sort of stuck. Whereas if you have an unlocked phone, you can then take it to any provider, whether it's AT&T, BT, Orange, whoever, you can actually move it around. And that's what we're seeing more now with the diversity in satellite airtime provision, whether it be different providers in different regions, different frequency bands, so that we can switch between frequency bands, either manually or automatically. And then also with the option to go from tracking a stationary geo satellite to tracking the moving satellites. So we see now the need is to ensure the hardware and the equipment is built in such a way that when we put it on board, we know that in 2 years, 3 years' time, if the client wishes to increase their throughput and in doing so connect to a MEO service, then they can do that. They're not replacing all of the hardware. You're not changing everything. You might be changing the firmware or the software in the controller, and you may be changing the frequency band by putting in some different components. But it means that you're not swapping out the complete equipment. I mean, this is great. So you've painted the domes to match the yacht. Everything's built and all built in, looking stunning. You don't want to have to pull all those off and put new ones on. So, it means that you're future-proofing the investment. And I think that's key, ensuring that the equipment today that someone might select is secure, and they're secure in the knowledge that they can use it in the future on a different network or a different provider.
Yeah, okay. So that sort of brings me on to a question that's been bothering me, and I'm not sure of the answer in my own head at the moment. So perhaps before you two, my thought process is that as the Leo Mio comes into it, and if you listen to the powers to be in OneWeb and those sort of companies, it means that what they're trying to tell us, I believe, is that each person in the long run, their cell phone that they have will be the link to that service. So how do you see your positioning as a global manufacturer of antennas, if that's going to happen, if all of a sudden each of those people that are coming on board has their own ability to be able to connect? Why would they then want to use your antennas, or anybody else's for that matter? I mean, anybody in the marketplace.
So one of the main limiting factors, it will be the fact that you have to be outside to be able to do what you refer about. So there is a little bit of a misperception of how the cell phone to satellite will operate in the long run. So the satellite to cell phone will operate in a way that you will use a closer extension of the satellite network, but your phone will continue to operate in the current RF environment that is used to operate currently. The difference is that you don't have to build this massive grid of cell phone towers that communicate with each other, and they will be more like you to the tower and the tower to the satellite.
Yeah.
Yes, there is companies in the market like AST that has a technology to, from the cell phone, be able to directly beam to the satellites on LEO. But that is designed for spaces and environments where you do not live or operate within a building.
Yeah,
it
so
will be quite difficult.
In the marketplace that people understand, like the Iridium handset or whatever.
Correct.
But yeah, so okay, carry on then.
So there is environments, for example, people that it's on a farm where they need massive amount of IoTs to be deployed across. They don't have to aggregate it to a single cell phone or to a single network and then transmit it. All of these IoTs or cell phones, they can operate up directly to the satellite with a minimum cost. And that's the key element of the applications of cell phones to satellite. It is close that gap between a massive infrastructure of 2-3 dishes where you are able to do it just with a single IoT device or a cell phone. Paul, you want to aggregate?
Yeah, I was just, I think you both covered the sort of topic of these devices that communicate directly to the satellite. We have to remember that it's line of sight to a satellite, meaning you have to be out in the open for your handheld satellite communication device, or some satellite communication device has to have vision to the satellite. So in all the movies and TV shows where you see somebody inside an aeroplane or underground using a satellite phone, it's just not happening. They have to be out in clear line of sight to the satellite.
That's Hollywood.
And so that's sort of one thing that you'll see. But following on from that, it's also with regard to, as Blad said, if there's a farm out in the middle of the country, they have easy line of sight. They're connecting to satellites. It's quite easy. But when you have a satellite communication device in a city, you're in a sort of concrete jungle or concrete canyon. There's a lot of blockage. And so again, it's communicating in an RF path in a normal radio way to then connect to the satellite. And that's an important thing to consider, is blockage will still be an issue with satellite communication in the future. However, with MEO and LEO, because the satellites are describing an arc, either a polar or an equatorial arc, it will actually mean that the blockage issues will be somewhat reduced, because if one area is blocked, you may be seeing a different satellite. So in the future, we will see an improvement in that with the reduction of blockage situations that can't be overcome through multiple antennas.
Yeah. And Pippa, I would like to add to that. Currently, if we see on the 5G deployments, the way that Apple did it, it has the ability to operate on LTE, which is a low power consumption, ability to deliver the data speeds a normal person in a normal operation will need. And then they go to switch to 5G when the demand of bandwidth reaches a certain point and 5G is available, it switches to that. And if 5G millimeter wave, which is the last component of the 5G, it's there, they will switch to that when you're demanding streaming, etc. The way that I see the long term is that your phone will have the ability to be connected to LEO as your demand for bandwidth is there. And as you reduce or you are covered because you're in a building, it will switch to an LTE and then it will, or a 5G or something of that nature. And it will operate across this routing environment where you have multi-path selection. And to bring that to our listeners on the yacht world, you will have all of your guests, you may need larger capacity. So your system will switch to a larger bandwidth. And as you are by yourself with your wife in your yacht on your private trip, you don't need that much. So you switch back to a small pipe and then we'll transition between the two and it will make it economically feasible as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think, I've sort of got this very similar thoughts on it myself. That's how, I guess in many ways, if you think that currently, when even going back 5 years ago, when you pick a phone up and you want to make a phone call to Australia on a landline, I'm talking now, that's backhauled over C-band or wherever so we are sort of doing some of that in a lesser technology at this moment, really. So in essence then, guys, where would what with Intellian as a company? I know there seems to be a massive amount of growth within the Intellian organization at the moment. There's lots of investment, new buildings going up here, there, and everywhere, and so I'm presuming that the future is looking very rosy. Paul.
Yeah. So thanks. It is. Things are looking great. It's interesting because, of course, we're in a pandemic situation, and so different markets have been more affected than others. But I think it's interesting. We've been able to invest in technology and invest in sort of building these future products. And as MEO and LEO technologies come along, and these new providers of satellite communications that are really targeting consumer markets, that we're involved with those very heavily as well. So it's really an exciting time for Intellian. As you mentioned, we're growing the buildings in Europe and in our R&D center. We've increased the sort of number of products. We're bringing new products out all the time. And it's growing. It's an interesting time to be in the satellite world. And when I joined this company, we had 3 VSAT antennas and half a dozen TV antennas. And now we have at least 25 versions of communication device, as well as a similar number of satellite television antennas. So it's growing rapidly. And we see it a very solid future for the company and the industry because everyone wants connectivity. People now expect to have the throughput they need to work from home or work from onboard their yacht, whether that yacht's in the Caribbean, in the Med, whether it's an Explorer yacht heading up the inside channels here up in the Puget Sound, or on a houseboat on a lake in the middle of the US. There's needs across all types of market, and we're very happy to be able to provide solutions to all of those, whether that's TV communication and future communication, whether it's the land terminal that's connecting to the satellite or the user's terminal on board the yacht or commercial ship or cruise liner.
So, Intellian itself is a pretty diverse company. I mean, you do. I seem to remember a couple of years ago you rolling up to a show in England with a backpack and you and you carried it through security and everything, and we unpacked it and set up a lander terminal in a restaurant in Southampton.
Yeah.
And I guess too, with the TV antennas that you were talking about, the fact that you have land-based stuff, the company itself is quite diverse. Where do you see TVRO in? Do you see a growth in that, or do you see a decline in that with the onset of IPTVs, Vlad?
So we see a trend to a decline the moment the customers start to adopt larger bandwidth for the same economical expense that they had on Geo. Certain customers are moving toward that angle heavily, especially super yachts. We're seeing there's one getting built right now in Mayer in Germany, and I got impressed when the request came in for 5 VSATs, no TVROs. The customer will be one of the first Empower customers on the yacht market, and they will not need TVRO. They can stream all the Netflix, YouTube TV, whatever thing they want to stream with the capacity they will serve to that yacht. Yes, it is a trend, but it is a trend that it will take some time to be adopted. As the delivery of bandwidth increases from different players in the LEO market. And why do I have that little skepticism is, remember, LeoSat was one of the first runner. They fell off the table.
Yeah.
OneWeb fell off the table and got picked up again and brought up by the UK government and BATI. SpaceX has continued to deliver their massive services, but they're not ready for maritime. And we're waiting for the others. Telesat announced the Lightspeed is going to be 3 to 4 years before they have the services available. So until that time, whoever that he wants to have the news and he has to pay high prices for bandwidth, he will continue to have a TVRO. So that's why we continue to develop TVROs and continue to enhance the product to make sure the customers are receiving the services they're looking for.
Are you guys going to stay in the L-band market, do you think?
The L-band market, it's a market that is growing for terrestrial services and for VSAT companions heavily, because as services becomes more and more reliable, any failure, it's now cannot be accounted as part of the SLAs of the contract. So having an L-band connection, yes, it's a small pipe, but it's a very rain resistant, weather resistant, and it's able to reach in like Iridium that reaches everywhere in the world. Yeah. Your team, in whichever your office is, can go back and return the services to operation in the major pipes of VSAT. So your SLAs are continued to be within those 4 or 5 nines and the unrealistic 6 nines that some customers request in order to operate their services.
I've looked at, we haven't installed one yet, but I've had a good look at your Certus antenna. I really like that. So we were involved.
We spent a lot of.
We were involved. We were involved in the beta of the Thales unit with a particular vessel, and when I compare what I've seen with yours and with that, it's a very, very nice unit, very professionally put together, thought about.
We got an advantage, Pippa. We came in last, so we learned the lessons from everybody.
Yeah, sure.
And as an engineering company, we make sure we accomplish and remove most of them, to not say it all. Yeah. And then was able to raise the bar for the next that it wants to get and compete in that market.
So the educational part of that little statement there is that don't always be the first through the door. You have to think about sitting back, seeing the screw ups that other people make, pick up the pieces and put it right. Anyway, guys, look, it's been really great chatting to you.
Sure.
We'll hopefully catch up when this COVID debacle is settled. I know, Paul, you're probably itching to get out and get traveling again.
Yes, it's been an interesting year because now having not traveled for a whole year, it's really unusual because of all of the trade events and the shows and activity that Intellian was involved with has obviously all got put on hold. Fortunately, everyone's safe and we're all coming through it, but it does seem to be very odd not being able to go out and visit and bring some new products. But I think it's interesting how we've been able to pivot and been able to switch over to doing a lot more virtual activity, a lot more sort of live webinars and live video presentations. And my studio, or I say my studio, my office looks more like a TV studio now. So it's been an interesting transition. And I think we've sort of coped fairly well with it, but I must say it'd be nice to be out and on the road for a little bit again.
Yeah, it's nothing takes the place of that glass of wine or cold beer at the end of a long day of a trade show. I know we've shared a few.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, guys, really good to talk to you. And thank you very much for taking part in this today. And I'll hand back to Dave in the studio now, and we'll let our listeners brood on what you've had to say whilst they listen to some future music. Thanks very much, guys. Adios.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pippa. It's been great. Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.